Senator Patty Murray walked into this hearing ready to talk about PFAS chemicals, forever chemicals linked to cancer, liver problems, and developmental delays in children. She wanted to know why EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin gutted drinking water standards that could have saved $1.5 billion in health costs.
The reason I ask is because EPA's own research found that PFAS standards that you gutted could have saved $1.5 billion in avoided
Again, it was a
health
legal
costs,
requirement, Senator.
in avoided health costs.
Then she had to ask a different question. Do you seriously believe there's abortion in the water? That happened. A United States senator actually had to ask the head of the Environmental Protection Agency whether he buys into a far-right conspiracy theory that abortion medication is contaminating wastewater. The New York Times reported that senior EPA officials were directed to look into tracking abortion medication in the water. House Republicans put a provision about it in their EPA funding bill.
And last year, House Republicans actually included a provision of that in their EPA funding bill. Are you actually spending taxpayer dollars looking into medication abortion being in the water?
Zeldin's response? He's not aware of anything. He hasn't had any conversations. He doesn't even know what Murray is talking about. Either he's lying, or he's so disconnected from his own agency that he doesn't know what his senior officials are doing. Neither option is reassuring. This is not a hearing about environmental protection anymore. It's a hearing about whether the EPA has lost its mind. Let's watch.
Fisher, we will turn to the ranking member of the full committee, Senator Murray.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Welcome, Administrator. Washington State has been a real leader in responding to contamination from PFAS. These are forever chemicals, and they've been linked to cancer, liver, thyroid problems, fertility issues. They're very widespread. They're very hard to replace, but that has not stopped my state from really working hard to tackle this problem head on. Washington State actually led the way in banning PFAS in food packaging and in firefighting foam. And in 2024, EPA actually followed Washington State's lead and set federal drinking water standards for 6 of PFAS chemicals for the first time ever. Last year, you proposed rescinding standards for 4 of these chemicals, citing cost and flexibility. Administrator Zeldin, what analysis has EPA conducted on the health cost of rescinding these PFAS drinking water standards, and specifically, what impacts can we expect to see in developmental delays, decreased birth weights, or early puberty for children?
Well, Senator, the extension of PFOA and PFOS for 2 years, that was primarily based on costs. With regards to the rescission of the 4 other types of PFAS, that was following litigation because the process under the Safe Drinking Water Act that was followed.
Actually, that wasn't the question I was asking you. I was asking you what analysis you've done on the health costs, not on the health costs, the impact, especially to our kids.
Okay, I thought you were asking me about the rescission of the 4.
I'm asking you what the health cost is of that rescission.
Well, so
Have you done an analysis?
That was a legal.
Have you looked at it?
Well, we have absolutely. We have extensive work going on across the agency on all sorts of aspects regarding PFAS, and it's a really long list of work that the agency is involved with.
The reason I ask is because EPA's own research found that PFAS standards that you gutted could have saved $1.5 billion in avoided
Again, it was a
health
legal
costs,
requirement, Senator.
in avoided health costs. And we just can't allow the cost for compliance.
We have to follow the law.
Well, I'm just telling you what the health cost of this is. That's
I
what my
agree that
question
there's
is.
a health cost.
And I believe that it is really important that we make sure we are doing the right thing, that we are protecting children's health, not doing what corporations need, because there is not yet any proven treatment. You know that for PFAS. The only solution is keeping it out of water in the first place, and that is the point I'm making, is the health impacts. Let me go to another question. Mr. Administrator, the anti-abortion activists are pushing this really absurd argument that women who use birth control or self-managed abortions or miscarriages at home somehow pose a risk to our public health and to the environment. I am deeply concerned that this radical conspiracy has found an audience at the EPA. Last October, the New York Times reported that senior EPA officials directed scientists to look into how the federal government could track traces of abortion medication in wastewater. And last year, House Republicans actually included a provision of that in their EPA funding bill. Are you actually spending taxpayer dollars looking into medication abortion being in the water?
Unless they're one of the many hundreds of pharmaceuticals on the list of the contaminant candidate list, I'm not aware of the agency doing anything with that.
Do you seriously believe there's abortion in the water like some of the far-right activists are suggesting?
I have not. You just said abortion in the water?
That's what some far-right activists are saying, that they have an audience in the EPA on that absurd issue.
Yeah, I have not had a conversation with anyone at the agency as far as abortions in water.
And you're not actively pursuing it or don't have groups of...
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Well, I'm referring to a New York Times article that reported that senior officials have directed scientists in the EPA to look at this.
Okay. Well, again, unless you're referring to a pharmaceutical that is on the list of the hundreds of pharmaceuticals that are part of the contaminant candidate list 6. But aside from that, I'm not aware of anything else at the agency other than that.
I'm citing a New York Times article, and we're happy to get it to you, but I just got to say, this is really crazy. This isn't environmental protection. I hope that there is nothing going on in your agency. This is not science, it's not healthcare, and it's not the job of the EPA. Just wanted to make that clear. I also want to associate the comments of the chair of this committee and Senator Baldwin on the state revolving funds. Cutting them by 90% to me is just absurd. Have you actually talked to water utilities about what sort of price increase that your proposal would cost them and their utility customers?
Senator, well, we're in touch with thousands of water utilities all the time, all across the entire country about this. But as I pointed out earlier, what we don't propose, I'm not opining on the merits of congressionally directed spending, and I'm not opining on congressional set-asides, but the account has been getting depleted on grants, not loans, so it hasn't been revolving. We, in our budget, do not propose congressionally directed spending. That's something that Congress is going to decide.
Which I know you took well part in
but
when you were a member of Congress.
That was the primary difference between what the president had proposed in FY26 and the final appropriation. The delta is primarily made up of congressionally directed spending. The president's not going to propose it. I'm not going to sit here and advocate for it, but what I will advocate for is that when Congress does decide to do congressionally directed spending, then my job is to help make sure that that money gets out as effectively as possible.
That is different than the 90% cut that you are proposing in your budget.
Well, that's why your 90% number is misleading, because you're not factoring in what is going to be added to the amount that is proposed in congressionally directed spending.
So you're just saying, Congress, if you want this, you got to, each individual senator has to...
The president's not asking for your earmarks,
Okay,
Senator.
No, but I'm just saying...
I don't know how much you want to raid the SRF.
Mr. Administrator, let me
that's something for you to
just
fight
finish.
for.
What I need you to understand is the clean water revolving funds, state revolving funds, are absolutely critical to our states. And you say there's money hanging out there. I heard your answer on that. The fact is that it actually takes communities and states a lot to design and engineer and put this all together, and they have to have the money first and in order to do that. And what we do know is because there's a lot of positions that have been eliminated at EPA. It's taking a lot longer for those funds to get out there.
That's not accurate.
So yes, it is. And so
Absolutely untrue.
I need to make this point because I agree with the chair that this is a fund that is critical for our states, and our families just simply cannot afford to make up these funds. This is something I feel really strongly about. And by the way, our CDS projects are still water projects. We don't raid the water funding to do that. So that is my
loans are being turned into grants.
Madam Chair.
Thank you.
There are congressional hearings where serious policy differences are debated in good faith. Then there are hearings where a United States senator has to ask the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency whether he believes there is abortion in the water. This was the second kind. Senator Patty Murray came to this hearing with 3 distinct lines of attack, and she landed every single one. The first was about PFAS, forever chemicals. They are called forever chemicals because they do not break down in the environment or in the human body. They accumulate. They persist. They have been linked to cancer, liver damage, thyroid disease, fertility issues, developmental delays in children, decreased birth weights, early puberty. Washington state banned them in food packaging and firefighting foam. In 2024, the EPA finally followed Washington's lead and set federal drinking water standards for 6 PFAS chemicals for the first time ever. Then Lee Zeldin became administrator, and he proposed rescinding standards for 4 of those chemicals. His reasons? Costs, flexibility, litigation, not children's health, not the families who have been drinking contaminated water for decades, not the $1.5 billion in avoided health costs that EPA's own research said the standards would save. Murray pressed him on what analysis the EPA had done on the health costs of rescinding those standards. Zeldin dodged. He talked about extensions based on costs. He talked about litigation. He talked about extensive work across the agency on all sorts of aspects regarding PFAS. But he never answered her question. He never said what the health impact would be on children, because the answer is devastating, and he doesn't want to say it out loud. The second line of attack was the one that will get the headlines: the abortion in the water conspiracy. Murray laid it out plainly. Anti-abortion activists are pushing an absurd argument that women who use birth control or self-manage abortions or miscarriages at home pose a risk to public health and the environment. The New York Times reported that senior EPA officials directed scientists to look into tracking abortion medication in wastewater. House Republicans put a provision about it in their EPA funding bill. Murray asked Zeldin directly, "Are you spending taxpayer dollars looking into medication abortion being in the water?" Zeldin's response was a masterclass in political evasion. He said unless they're on the contaminant candidate list, he's not aware of anything. He said he hasn't had a conversation with anyone about abortions in water. He said he doesn't even know what Murray is talking about. But here's the thing. The New York Times article exists. The reporting is out there. The House Republican provision exists. So either Zeldin is telling the truth and he is genuinely unaware of what his own agency is doing, which would be a stunning admission of incompetence, or he is aware and he is pretending not to be, which would be a lie under oath. Or he is aware and he genuinely doesn't see the problem with the EPA investigating whether abortion medication is in the water, which would be a terrifying window into his worldview. Murray didn't let him off the hook. She called it what it is: crazy. Not science, not healthcare, not the job of the EPA. She said she hopes nothing is going on at the agency. But the fact that she had to ask, the fact that the question even exists in a congressional hearing, is a sign of how far the conspiracy theories have penetrated into the federal government. The third line of attack was about state revolving funds. These are critical funding mechanisms that help communities build and maintain water infrastructure. They are called revolving funds because the money gets loaned out, repaid, and loaned out again. It is one of the most effective and efficient ways the federal government has ever devised to help local communities afford clean water. And Zeldin's budget proposed cutting them by 90%. 90%. Murray asked if he had talked to water utilities about what price increases that would cause for their customers. Zeldin said he's in touch with thousands of water utilities. He said the account has been getting depleted on grants, not loans. He said the president's not asking for earmarks. He said he doesn't know how much Murray wants to raid the SRF. He never addressed the core issue, that a 90% cut would devastate communities across the country. Small towns would not be able to afford to replace lead pipes. Rural counties would not be able to afford to treat PFAS contamination. Poor communities would be left drinking poisoned water because they cannot afford the alternative. Murray's closing point was the most important one. She said it takes communities and states time to design and engineer water projects. They have to have the money first. And because the EPA has eliminated so many positions, it's taking longer for funds to get out the door. Zeldin said that's not accurate. Murray said yes, it is. And on that note, The exchange ended. What makes this hearing so striking is the contrast between the three issues. PFAS contamination is real. The health impacts are documented. The science is settled. The EPA's own research supports stricter standards. But Zeldin is rolling them back anyway. The abortion in the water conspiracy is not real. There is no evidence. There is no science. There is no public health rationale. But senior EPA officials were reportedly told to look into it anyway. The state revolving funds are effective. They work. They help communities. But Zeldin's budget would cut them by 90% anyway. The pattern is clear. When science supports protecting public health, Zeldin ignores it. When conspiracy theories support restricting abortion access, Zeldin's agency investigates it. When federal funding helps communities afford clean water, Zeldin cuts it. Murray did not raise her voice. She did not interrupt. She did not resort to personal insults. She just asked questions, and Zeldin's inability to answer them told the story. He couldn't say what the health costs of rescinding PFAS standards would be because he hasn't done the analysis, or he has, and the numbers are damning. He couldn't say whether the EPA is investigating abortion in the water because either he doesn't know what his agency is doing or he does know and doesn't want to admit it. He couldn't say how communities would afford water infrastructure after a 90% cut because there is no good answer. The EPA is supposed to protect the environment and public health. That is its entire reason for existing. But under Zeldin, it seems more focused on protecting corporate interests, entertaining conspiracy theories, and cutting funding for the very communities it is supposed to serve. Murray's final words were a plea. She said the state revolving funds are critical. She said families cannot afford to make up these funds. She said she feels really strongly about this. She was speaking for every community that relies on clean water, for every child whose development could be affected by PFAS, for every person who just wants the government to do its job. Zeldin's response was bureaucratic deflection. The president's not asking for earmarks. The account has been depleted on grants. That's something for you to fight for. He never said he would protect clean water. He never said he would prioritize children's health. He never said he would stop the conspiracy theories. He just passed the buck. This hearing was not a debate. It was an exposure. Murray exposed the fact that the EPA is rolling back PFAS standards without analyzing the health costs. She exposed the fact that the EPA has been drawn into an absurd conspiracy about abortion in the water. She exposed the fact that the EPA's budget would devastate the very programs that help communities afford clean water. And Zeldin had no good answers, not because he's a poor witness, because the policies he is defending are indefensible.